Chief Engineer Kalen Voss wiped grease from his brow, the smell of ozone and burnt metal thick in the recycler bay's recycled air. The orbital shipyard Argent Forge stretched for kilometers around them, a skeletal maze of gantries, docking clamps, and unfinished warships. His team was scrambling to reinforce the outer hull, their breath fogging in the sub-zero vacuum beyond the force fields. Another breach in Sector 7. He grunted, tapping the schematics on his datapad. The numbers were climbing, and they didn't make sense. These weren't micrometeoroids or structural failures. Something was tearing through the forge's hull like it was tissue paper. A distant scream echoed through the corridor, followed by the wet, tearing sound of metal being ripped apart. Voss froze. The sound was too organic, too deliberate. All hands, fall back to the inner ring, he barked into his comms. Something's in the ducts. The reply was a burst of static, then a wet gurgling that cut the transmission short. He didn't need to see it to know. The rumors were true. The tunnelers were here. Dr. Eris Thorne pressed his back against the cold bulkhead, the biometric scanner in his hand trembling. The lab was in chaos, shattered glass, spilled nutrient gels, and the stench of burnt wiring. The tunnelers had breached the biocontainment wing, and now they were hunting. He'd seen one up close, its segmented body coiling through a corridor, mandibles clicking as it sampled the air. But it wasn't just eating metal. It was eating the forge itself. "Thorne, you there?" Voss's voice crackled in his ear. "We've got a plan. The tunnelers are vulnerable to certain organic compounds." Thorne's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what Voss was implying. The forge's stores of human rations, protein bars, nutrient paste, preserved meats, were laced with compounds toxic to most non-terrestrial biology. It was a failsafe, a last resort. But using it meant turning the station's food into a weapon. "Kalen, that's insane," he whispered. "We'll poison the entire ecosystem." "Better than being eaten alive," Voss snapped. "The kitchens are in the lower decks. Can you rig the dispensers to aerosolize the paste?" Thorne looked at the half-eaten protein bar on his desk, its synthetic peanut butter suddenly looking less like a snack and more like a bomb. The tunnel's head burst through the bulkhead like a grotesque flower, its mandibles dripping acidic saliva. Vessels pulsed beneath its chitinous plates, and its multifaceted eyes swiveled to lock onto him. Sergeant Eva Rostova didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle, the modified firing chamber spewing a cloud of nutrient paste aerosol. The tunneler recoiled, its body convulsing as the mist settled on its skin. A high-pitched shriek tore through the air as its flesh began to bubble and slew off. "It works," Rostova gasped, backing away as the tunneler dissolved into a puddle of black sludge. But the victory was short-lived. More tunnelers were emerging from the walls, their bodies swelling as they absorbed the metal around them. The aerosol was slowing them, but not stopping them. Voss's voice crackled in her ear. "We need more. The kitchens, now." The lower decks were a labyrinth of conveyor belts and industrial freezers. Thorne and his team worked frantically, rerouting the nutrient paste dispensers to vent into the station's ventilation system. The air grew thick with the sweet, cloying smell of artificial vanilla and chocolate. "How long before it saturates the station?" Thorne asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Minutes," Voss replied, his voice tight. "But we need to concentrate it. The tunnelers are adapting." Thorne glanced at the biometric scanner. The tunnelers' heart rates were slowing, their bodies developing a resistance. The first wave of the aerosol was already losing its effect. Rostova burst into the room, her armor scarred and her face streaked with grime. "They're breaking through the inner ring. We need to buy time." Thorne looked at the vat of concentrated nutrient paste, then at the emergency release valves. There was only one way to make this work. The tunneler slammed into the reinforced door, its body thickening as it absorbed the metal. Rostova and her squad fired their rifles, the nutrient paste rounds tearing chunks from its flesh, but it kept coming. "Now," Voss's voice boomed over the comms. Thorne slammed his palm on the emergency release. A tidal wave of concentrated nutrient paste flooded the corridor, thick enough to walk on. The tunneler plunged into it, and for a moment, it seemed to thrive, its body swelling to twice its size. Then, the convulsions began. Its flesh turned black and necrotic, and it exploded in a shower of acidic gore. But the paste was corrosive, eating through the floor plates and destabilizing the entire deck. "We've got to go," Rostova yelled, dragging Thorn toward the escape pods. The station was coming apart around them. The escape pods jettisoned into the void, the Argent Forge behind them a dying star. Thorn watched through the viewport as the station's reactors went critical, one by one. The explosions were beautiful, terrible, a final middle finger to the tunnelers. But the victory felt hollow. They'd destroyed the station, but the tunnelers were still out there, their numbers swelling in the debris field. "We did it," Rostova whispered, slumping against the wall. "We stopped them." Thorn didn't answer. He was staring at his hands, still sticky with nutrient paste. They'd won, but at what cost? The forge was gone, and so was their only source of food. The tunnelers had taught them a brutal lesson. In this universe, survival meant becoming the monster. The pod drifted for days, the crew surviving on emergency rations, tiny, tasteless cubes of synthetic nutrients. Thorn couldn't shake the memory of the paste, the way it had burned through metal and flesh alike. It was a weapon, but it was also poison, and they were running out of both. "Signal," Rostova said, pointing to the scanner. A faint transmission, repeating a single sequence. It wasn't human. Thorn's blood ran cold. The tunnelers were communicating. They'd learned. The transmission led them to a derelict freighter, its hull scarred with the same acidic residue the tunnelers left behind. Thorn and Rostova boarded cautiously, the air thick with the smell of decay. The freighter's logs were corrupted, but the crew's final message was clear: they're in the food. Thorn froze. The tunnelers hadn't just adapted to the nutrient paste, they'd infected it. Their biology was merging with the synthetic compounds, creating something new, something worse. The freighter's cargo hold was a nightmare. Rows of nutrient paste canisters, now pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow. Thorn touched one, and it reacted, a tendril of black slime lashing out to wrap around his wrist. It burned, but not like fire. It burned like hunger. "They're growing," Rostova said, her voice trembling. "They're using the paste to reproduce." Thorn realized the truth. The tunnelers weren't just eating the station, they were replacing it. The nutrient paste was their new hive, their new home. The escape pod's engines screamed as they jettisoned from the freighter, the canisters behind them erupting in a wave of black slime. The tunnelers were free, and they were hungry. Thorn looked at the last of their emergency rations, the synthetic cubes in his hand. They were poison now. Poison for the tunnelers, and poison for them. The universe had taught them a harsh lesson. In the war for survival, the only thing more dangerous than the enemy is yourself. And as the pod drifted into the endless dark, Thorn knew the war was far from over. It had only just begun.